This is Eyes on Africa, EOA News on YouTube at Hermela TV. I'm Hermela Aragawi. Today, I speak with Ethiopia's human rights head, Daniel Bekele, Chief Commissioner of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission.
We have a wide range of human rights problems in Ethiopia.
Bekele is a lawyer and previously worked with Human Rights Watch as their Africa Division Director. He was appointed head of Ethiopia's Human Rights Commission in 2019 and since has seen a range of issues, including repeated ethnic killings by armed groups, government security abuses, and a host of problems related to a 2-year war between the Ethiopian government and members of the Tigray People's Liberation Front. A peace agreement between the two parties was signed in November. Here is my conversation with Daniel Bekele, Chief Commissioner of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. Thank you, Daniel, for making the time. I know you have a very busy schedule, so we'll just get right into the questions. I would like to begin with the peace deal between the Ethiopian government and the TPLF. The Ministry of Justice said last week that it had withdrawn criminal charges from TPLF leadership and will have them dealt with within the transitional justice framework. Meanwhile, people are watching some of them being given what appears to be special treatment in Addis Ababa after so many lives were lost in this war. A lot of people are already feeling a sense of injustice because of this. What would you say to them?
Thanks, Hermela. I would say it is probably for the Ministry of Justice to explain about the withdrawal of the charges, but my sense is the withdrawal of these charges should not necessarily be interpreted as dropping accountability for all the human rights violations committed by all parties to the conflict, because the parties to the conflict have agreed on a transitional justice process and mechanisms which has started to be implemented, and that mechanism is supposed to be the vehicle to deliver justice and accountability, as well as for seeking and telling the truth and reparation of victims, and making sure that Ethiopia takes necessary institutional and legislative, including probably constitutional reforms, to ensure non-recurrence of such violations. So it is important to keep in mind the big picture, which is about designing and implementing a proper, credible, genuine, human rights compliant transitional justice process, which is a standard methodological approach for all post-conflict countries to deliver justice.
When the Ministry of Justice announced last week that it would withdraw criminal charges from the TPLF, one question that came up is what happens to the criminal charges filed against other parties to the conflict? But my understanding now is that there weren't criminal charges filed against other parties, correct?
That's correct, Hermela, except that we are aware there were a few number of trials by military tribunal against some soldiers who were accused of crimes in the context of the war, but that was a military tribunal, which was not a public trial, and we don't have details of that, except that a little over a year ago, we've been told that a certain number of people have been convicted by a military tribunal. Other than that, there has not been any formal charges filed against any one of the parties to the conflict or their members.
The joint investigation that the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission did with the UN High Commissioner was one of the most comprehensive reports on the conflict, although it only covered up to June 2021. After that, a separate UN Commission of Experts on Ethiopia was created, and it seemed to be a replacement mechanism, and the joint investigation didn't continue. Do you think the transitional justice process would look different if that joint investigation mechanism continued?
The UN Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia, established by the UN Human Rights Council, was not exactly to replace the work of the joint investigation, but actually to complement on the work of the joint investigation. It's very clear on the mandate which established that UN Commission of Human Rights Experts that it is established to build upon on the work of the joint investigation. So it is not a replacement of the joint investigation work. Actually, the Human Rights Council that has established the UN Commission of Human Rights Experts has clearly acknowledged and thanked the work done by the joint investigation, and it felt a need to establish an additional mechanism to build upon the work of the joint investigation. That was one mandate of the UN Commission of Human Rights Experts. The second mandate given to the UN Commission of Human Rights Experts is to support the transitional justice process in the country, which is also in line with the joint investigation report recommendations. So in all of its mandates, a mandate of building upon the work of the joint investigation, as well as the support for the transitional justice process, the UN Commission of Human Rights Experts are supposed to be building upon or complementing on the work of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and the UN Human Rights Commission joint investigation work.
Is that what's happening? Is that what the UN Commission is doing?
Well, we have not yet seen the full report of the UN Commission of Human Rights Experts. But from my own conversation with the UN Commission of Human Rights Experts, they have told us that they have this understanding of their mandates, that it is supposed to be building upon the work of the joint investigation. And they are also keen to support Ethiopia on the transitional justice process, and they are reaching out to the government. But I do understand that there is somewhat misunderstanding about their interpretation and understanding of the mandate between the Ethiopian government and the UN Commission of Human Rights Experts. And I understand that they're still in the middle of conversation on interpretation and application of their mandate.
Really quickly want to get your take on what seems to be an increasing number of unlawful detentions and abuse by government security forces. The Ethiopian Human Rights Commission just did a third round of public inquiries on this. Is this a problem that is getting worse? And how is the government dealing with allegations against security forces?
Yeah, we have a wide range of human rights problems in Ethiopia, one of which is unlawful and arbitrary detention and ill treatment during detention. The Ethiopian Human Rights Commission has done an extensive amount of work around this, and we have a varying degree of response. In several instances, we've been able to get unlawfully or arbitrarily detained people to be released. In some instances, we have managed to get regional authorities to hold perpetrators accountable, including for extrajudicial killings. In some instances, a number of people who are unlawfully or arbitrarily detained remain in detention as we speak, which is why it is an ongoing concern. But at least the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission continues to track this worrying human rights situation about arbitrary detention, unlawful detention, as well as ill treatment during detention across the country.
You know, it struck me when you mentioned extrajudicial killings. Where is this happening and how big of an issue is this in Ethiopia?
Well, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission has investigated, documented, and reported instances of extrajudicial killings in different parts of the country at different times. But if I could just mention, the most recent one was in Gambela, when the security forces responded to an attack by armed groups operating in the area. They crossed the line and extrajudicially killed civilians in the region, which we have extensively documented and reported. But a few weeks back, we are encouraged by the response by the regional government, which has started criminal investigation against the alleged perpetrators, and we are encouraged by the response by the Ministry of Justice as well, which has launched a criminal investigation, which resulted in senior security officials, including the former regional police commissioner and deputy commissioners and other senior officials being arrested and criminal investigation launched. So that's one of the most recent instances of extrajudicial killings I was referring to.
I want to wrap with what's been happening in the Wallagga area. We've seen repeated heartbreaking mass killings, many of them of civilians at the hands of armed groups. The OLA, whom the government refers to as Oneg Shene, is believed to be responsible for most of them. I went through a lot of the reports on your commission's website, and at the end of many of the reports, the commission urges the government to find a peaceful solution to the problem. The government says it has tried talking to members of the group, and recently the call for dialogue has been brought up by some parliament members. Is this the right thing to do? And if it had been done sooner, could it have saved lives?
Hermela, as you noted, there are armed groups attacks, particularly targeting civilians, not only in the Wallagga zones in Oromia region, but in several places across the country. And perhaps the most egregious human rights violations in Ethiopia happen in a context of armed conflict, resulting in, deaths, bodily injury, displacement, destruction, and sexual and gender-based violence. All of these most serious human rights violations happen in a context of violent conflict, one of which is one in Oromia. So all of these violent conflicts have very deep-rooted and complex triggering factors and social, economic, and political background, which is why Ethiopia needs a peaceful and political solution for all these complex conflicts across the country. So we consider any political steps towards a peaceful search for all these problems is a step in the right direction. Ethiopia needs peaceful and political solutions for a wide range of violent conflicts across the country. So we welcome any steps towards peaceful political solutions for all violent conflicts in the country.
On Wallagga, Gambela, and other major issues in the country, is there accountability? Because a lot of people get the sense that there is never accountability, even if the atrocities are documented.
Yes, accountability is a big challenge, perhaps not only in Ethiopia, but probably in a lot of other places. Accountability is a big challenge, and accountability needs to be looked at as a process. And accountability also needs to be understood in a broader sense of seeking and telling the truth and reparation for victims and reinstating the lives of victims, not only just criminal accountability against perpetrators, but also remembering victims and compensating victims and giving back their life and restoring their life and so on, So that's also part of an accountability process. So in that sense, we are encouraged that in some instances, in some of the work we did, for example, in Somali region, we have seen victims being, or at least the families of victims being compensated. In some instances, such as the one I mentioned in Gambela now, we have seen alleged perpetrators being apprehended and criminal investigation starting. But that does not necessarily mean that in all of our investigation, documentation, and reporting, there is a response towards accountability. So that remains to be a challenge, but at the same time, we are encouraged that there are good examples of response both by regional and federal authorities in terms of holding some perpetrators accountable and in terms of delivering compensation for some victims.
Daniel Bakela, Chief Commissioner at the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. Daniel, thank you so much for making the time.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Hermela.